Imagine you finally buy that high-end sports car you've been saving up for. You get behind the wheel, ease out of the dealership, hit the gas,
I
and
mean, yes, it just sputters.
exactly, it shudders, it tops out at like 40 miles an hour and barely responds. And your immediate reaction is probably to blame the engine.
Oh, for
Don't
sure.
you?
You assume the manufacturer built a terrible machine.
Yeah, you just want to throw the keys right back at him. But what if you accidentally put diesel fuel in a gasoline engine? Or, what if you're trying to drive it with the parking brake fully engaged?
Right. The car's underlying design is actually flawless in that case.
Exactly. The design is perfect, but the way you're operating it, the implementation is completely broken.
And, I mean, we encounter that exact scenario constantly in applied behavior analysis.
We really do. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. I'm so excited for this one because we are officially wrapping up Domain C of the BCBA Foundations Measurement, Data Display, and Interpretation.
It's been a long journey through Domain C, but this is a great finish.
Yeah, today we are unpacking Item C.12, which is selecting measurement procedures to obtain representative procedural integrity data. And if you want more resources on this, you can always check out www.amethysttherapyservices.com.
Definitely. And getting back to your car analogy, we design these incredibly detailed, evidence-based intervention plans. We hand them off, and when a client's behavior fails to improve, the instinct is just to
throw out the plan.
Exactly. We throw out the plan entirely. We blame the design, or worse, we blame the client for being, quote-unquote, resistant to treatment.
Which is just, I mean, it's wild that we do that without ever checking to see if the parking brake was left on, so to speak.
Right. Before you tear up the blueprint, you have to ask, is the plan bad or is the implementation broken?
So procedural integrity, it's basically the ultimate quality control mechanism, isn't it?
It really is. You can collect the most precise, accurate data in the world on a client's target behavior, the dependent variable, right? But if you aren't measuring how the treatment itself is actually being delivered, your data on the client is completely devoid of context. It's useless.
So procedural integrity, which I should mention is also called treatment integrity or procedural fidelity, they're all interchangeable. It's just the extent to which the independent variable is implemented exactly as planned.
Exactly as planned, yes.
But let me challenge that for a second, because if I hire a contractor to build a house, I just expect them to follow the blueprint.
Sure, you'd hope so.
Right. So if I give an RBT, a registered behavior technician, a written protocol, shouldn't I just trust that they're doing their job? Like, why do we need an entire scientific measurement category dedicated to checking on professionals?
Well, because without it, you cannot establish a functional relationship. And, I mean, that is the entire goal of our science.
Okay, break that down for us.
So a functional relationship proves that our intervention, the independent variable, is what actually caused the change of the behavior.
The dependent variable.
Exactly. If you don't measure the implementation, the independent variable is a total mystery. You might think you're running a specific reinforcement protocol, but the staff might be doing, well, something entirely different.
Right. They could be reinforcing the wrong thing entirely.
Yeah. And if the client fails to make progress and you don't have procedural integrity data, you run this massive risk. You might abandon a perfectly good, scientifically validated treatment.
Just because it wasn't actually being used correctly in the natural environment.
Exactly. You essentially have no idea what experiment you're actually running.
Which brings up the mechanical question, right? How do we actually prove the staff or the teachers or the parents are following the recipe?
Well, we have to measure their behavior, not just the clients.
Right. So how do we do that?
Yeah.
Standing there with a clipboard watching someone work feels incredibly invasive.
It can be, yeah. But we monitor them using specific objective tools. The standard methods are treatment integrity checks, competency checklists, and direct observation for brief intervals.
So you take the written protocol, break it down into observable steps, and you physically watch the person run the program.
Yes. You just check off whether they hit each specific step.
But why not just use a self-recording survey? Like, have the staff fill out a quick form at the end of the day rating their own implementation. I mean, it's faster, it scales better.
And it demonstrates trust, I know. But self-reporting is the absolute least effective way to examine procedural integrity.
Really? The absolute least?
Oh, yeah. Primarily because of how human memory and self-serving bias operate. It's not that staff are intentionally lying to you.
Right, they're not trying to sabotage the plan.
Exactly. The human brain just naturally smooths over its own errors. People genuinely believe you're implementing a plan correctly, even when they are drifting significantly from the protocol.
That makes sense. Like a staff member might unconsciously start providing extra hints during a task because they want the client to succeed.
Yes, they're completely unaware that they're violating the protocol and actually creating prompt dependency.
Wow, so you fade a prompt a little too slowly, or you give a reinforcer a second too late, and over a few weeks, the intervention has just mutated into something else entirely.
That's treatment drift in a nutshell. And direct, objective observation cuts right through that psychological blind spot.
Okay, so when we're doing that objective observation, there are two major dimensions we have to measure, right? Accuracy and dosage.
Yeah, those are the big two. Accuracy is the qualitative check.
Yeah.
Like, are they doing the steps in the right order?
Are they delivering the exact vocal instruction specified, or are they, paraphrasing?
Exactly. Are they providing the specific reinforcer required? And then dosage is the quantitative check.
Meaning, are they doing it often enough and for the correct duration?
Right. Take something like non-contingent reinforcement, or NCR.
Okay, so a plan might dictate that a client receives a brief break from work every 5 minutes, regardless of their behavior, just to proactively reduce frustration.
Perfect example. If the staff delivers that break perfectly great tone, clear transition, the accuracy is flawless.
But if they only remember to do it once an hour, the dosage is entirely wrong.
And the intervention will fail. The biological and environmental mechanism, frequent access to relief, just isn't happening.
So high procedural integrity on both accuracy and dosage usually dictates whether an intervention succeeds or fails.
It really does. Consider a punishment procedure, like response cost, where a token is removed following a specific challenging behavior.
Oh, yeah. For that to work, the environment has to be utterly predictable.
Utterly. If tokens are consistently and accurately removed every single time the behavior occurs, which means high treatment integrity, the data typically shows a rapid and significant decrease in that target behavior.
The client learns the exact boundaries of the contingency, but if the staff only removes the token half the time...
They've inadvertently put the challenging behavior on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement.
Wow. So they've made the behavior more resilient just by having low procedural integrity.
Exactly. They made it worse.
That is wild. But let's look at the systemic reasons behind this, because it's very easy to sit in an office, look at a 40% integrity score, and just blame the staff for being lazy.
Yeah, and it rarely comes down to a lack of caring or laziness.
So why do implementers actually fail to follow the plan?
The root causes are almost always environmental and resource constraints. We're dealing with real-world variables,
Like a lack of administrative support or high staff turnover?
Turnover is a huge one. Or chaotic physical environments, or expecting a single person to manage way too many competing demands simultaneously.
So if a BCBA writes this brilliant, cutting-edge, 20-step intervention plan...
That perfectly addresses the function of the behavior.
Yeah, but then they hand it to a staff member in a chaotic, understaffed group home who is managing 4 other clients in crisis? Is that a good behavior plan?
From an ethical and clinical standpoint, no, absolutely not.
A plan written in a vacuum is a failed plan.
It is. You have to tailor programs to the unique resources, the specific context, and the realistic capacities of the stakeholders involved.
Which brings us to the simplicity rule.
Yes, this is a fundamental clinical guideline. All things being equal, a simple and brief treatment will probably be applied more accurately and consistently than a complex, extended one.
That is basically the ultimate razor for behavior analysts.
Yeah.
A perfectly executed 3-step plan will yield way better clinical outcomes than a 20-step plan executed at 20% accuracy.
Every single time. If treatment integrity is chronically low, the BCBA has to analyze the environment.
Right. If the environment can only support a 3-step plan without causing cognitive overload for the staff, your job is to write the best 3-step plan possible.
You adjust the independent variable to survive the environment. But even with a simplified plan, the final bridge between the written word and actual human behavior is supervision and training.
Oh man, supervision. A major complicating factor in our field is that supervisors often lack formal training in how to actually supervise.
They really do. They rely on intuition, just telling staff what to do, which almost never translates to high procedural fidelity.
We've all seen the classic passive training model, right? A supervisor hands a newly hired RBT a dense 15-page behavior plan and says, read this, sign the back page, and go run the session.
That is a recipe for zero procedural integrity. The evidence-based alternative is behavioral skills training, or BST.
BST is the gold standard. It moves training from passive reading to active mastery. Can you walk us through the 4 steps?
Sure. It requires a really rigid sequence. First, you provide a clear written summary and vocal instruction.
Okay, step 1.
Second, the supervisor must physically demonstrate this skill. You model it either in a role-play scenario or in vivo-like, actually in the room with the client.
Right. And then third.
Third, you observe the staff member practicing the skill themselves. And fourth, and most importantly, you provide immediate competency-based feedback.
Competency-based is the critical word there. You don't just stop the training session because an hour has passed.
No, definitely not. You stop the training when the staff member can actually perform this skill correctly on the checklist.
And obviously, that requires the supervisor to be highly proficient in the skill themselves. You can't model what you can't do.
Exactly. That requirement forces the supervisor to stay grounded in the clinical reality of the interventions they design.
Okay, so poor training leads to accidental treatment drift. But we also have to confront the dark side of procedural integrity, which is data falsification.
Yeah, that's the elephant in the room. Staff faking data, estimating numbers, or waiting until Friday afternoon to fill out data sheets for the entire week.
Based on some vague memory of what happened on Tuesday.
Right, and this completely compromises the entire scientific process. If the data is fabricated, the BCBA is making medical decisions based on fiction.
So who bears the responsibility for that? Is it the staff?
Ultimately, the clinical and ethical burden falls squarely on the supervisor. You are accountable for your own work and the work of your supervisees.
But to solve data falsification, you have to understand the mechanism behind it, right? Like, staff rarely fake data out of malice.
No, almost never. They do it because they experience this massive disconnect between the clipboard and the client.
They view data collection as just this arbitrary administrative hurdle that pulls their attention away from the human being in front of them.
Exactly. They don't understand the why. If you just tell someone to put a tally mark on a paper every time a client speaks, it feels like busy work.
So what's the solution?
Transparency and involvement. You sit down with the staff, pull up the visual graphs, and show them exactly how those specific tally marks dictated the change in the intervention last week.
Oh, I love that, which resulted in the client having fewer tantrums this week.
Right. When they see that their clipboard directly influences the decisions that make their job easier and the client's life better, the data becomes a vital tool rather than a chore.
You transform them from data entry machines into clinical partners.
Yes. Good supervision builds that connection. It uses positive feedback to shape staff behavior. Actually, a fantastic strategy to break down that traditional hierarchy is to hand the competency checklist to the staff member and have them score you while you model the intervention.
Oh, turning the clipboard around. I love that. Watch me run this protocol and you tell me if I missed any steps.
It requires immense vulnerability from the supervisor, but it completely destroys the us versus them dynamic.
It establishes that the checklist isn't a weapon used to micromanage. It's an objective scientific standard that applies to everyone equally.
It builds incredible trust.
Okay, let's pivot from the clinical environment to the testing environment. Because for anyone preparing for the BCBA exam, Domain C presents a few classic traps regarding procedural integrity that consistently trip people up.
They really do. The most common error is conflating procedural integrity with inter-observer agreement, or IOA.
Right, those concepts sit right next to each other in the textbook, but they serve completely different diagnostic purposes.
Completely different.
IOA involves 2 observers independently watching the client and recording their behavior. We then compare their data to verify that the behavior actually occurred as recorded.
Right, so IOA measures the believability of the data on the dependent variable.
Yes, the dependent variable. But procedural integrity, conversely, is about whether the staff implemented the treatment correctly.
It measures the independent variable. So IOA checks the measurement of the symptom. Procedural integrity checks the application of the medicine.
That's a great way to put it. Think of IOA as a quality check on a police radar gun. We want to ensure the radar gun is properly calibrated, so 2 officers agree the car was going exactly 65 miles per hour.
Perfect analogy. And procedural integrity is looking down at the driver's feet to see if they are actually hitting the brakes when we told them to.
Exactly. So hold on to that distinction, everyone, because exam questions will actively try to blur those lines.
Oh, absolutely. You'll see a scenario where a treatment is drifting like staff are forgetting to deliver tokens on the correct schedule, and the multiple choice options will offer IOA as a potential solution.
Which sounds plausible if you're rushing through the test. oh, we have a data problem. Let's get 2 observers in there.
But if the fundamental problem is treatment drift, the answer is never IOA.
Never.
Having 2 people perfectly agree that a client is engaging in problem behavior does absolutely nothing to fix the fact that the staff aren't running the program correctly.
Right. The correct action is always a treatment integrity check, utilizing a competency checklist, or initiating behavioral skills training to retrain the staff.
Always. And the second major exam trap is how you react to low treatment integrity data once you have it.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So you observe a session, fill out your checklist, and realize the staff is only implementing your beautiful behavior plan with 40% accuracy.
And the client's progress has totally flatlined.
Exactly. The reflex is to look at the flat graph, look at the 40% integrity, declare the intervention a failure, and write a totally new plan.
But doing so violates the core logic of experimental design. You cannot evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention if that intervention was never actually introduced into the environment.
You have to sequence your problem solving. You intervene on the implementation issues first.
Yeah.
Why is accuracy at 40%?
Does the staff need more targeted BST? Is the plan violating the simplicity rule and causing cognitive overload?
Are there environmental barriers, like a lack of physical materials?
Yeah.
You have to fix the engine first.
You get procedural integrity up to 90% or higher, and only then can you actually trust the client's data to tell you if the intervention itself needs to be changed.
You troubleshoot the independent variable before you make decisions based on the dependent variable.
It entirely reorients how we look at clinical failure. Let's distill this down to the core mechanisms as we wrap up.
Sounds good.
Procedural integrity is the empirical proof that your treatment is actually happening in the real world. Without it, your client data is just noise masking an unknown reality.
Right. You measure it objectively with direct observation and competency checklists, tracking both the accuracy of the steps and the dosage of the delivery.
And you balance that clinical rigor against the chaotic realities of real-world environments by adhering to the simplicity rule.
And you sustain high fidelity over time through rigorous behavioral skills training, intentionally connecting staff to the why behind their data collection to prevent falsification and drift.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to the official conclusion of Domain C measurement, data display, and interpretation. For more resources, don't forget to visit www.amethysttherapyservices.com.
It's been a deep dive for sure.
It has. We've covered the foundational metrics of how we observe, quantify, and verify behavior in the real world. But next time, we are stepping into the architecture of discovery itself. Domain D, experimental design, and behavior analysis.
So I can't wait. Domain C gives us the tools to see clearly, but Domain D gives us the framework to prove causation. It is where the science truly comes alive.
We will be exploring how we manipulate those variables using single-subject designs to conclusively prove that our treatments actually work. But before you go, I want you to think back to the car metaphor.
The parking brake.
Yeah, the parking brake. I want you to consider a habit you've tried to build or a personal plan you attempted to follow in your own life that ultimately failed. Maybe it was a complex new budgeting system, a rigid dietary change, or, an aggressive workout routine.
They've all been there.
Looking back, was the plan itself actually flawed? Or did you just have incredibly low procedural integrity?
That's a great question.
And if your integrity was low, was it because you lacked willpower, or was the plan simply too complex to survive your current environmental constraints? Did you put the wrong fuel in the car, or did you just forget to take the parking brake off? Mull that over, and we'll see you next time.